Welcome to Therapist Confidential, a psychotherapy.net podcast. And now, here's your host, Travis Heath.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Therapist Confidential podcast. I'm your host, Travis Heath. And today, another solo episode talking about AI in therapy. I mean, do I need to say more than AI in therapy? I feel like this is something like in every break room, university hallway, wherever the practice of therapy is happening or being considered or being philosophized about, AI is a part of that discussion. Probably has been for some time, but AI seems to have really accelerated in the last even 6 months. I mean, I'm no expert on AI. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm none of that. But just as a person in the world who's also a therapist, it does seem like AI has really accelerated its capabilities in the last 6 months or so. And who knows what that might mean for the future. And so at one point in time, the discussion about AI was really a theoretical one. It's like, what if AI could do X, Y, or Z? What's that going to mean for therapy? And I sort of feel like we're we're past that conversation now because AI is already shaping mental health care, whether we care to realize it or not. And because of that, really like a collaborative sort of conversation would probably be helpful. Thinking about not how do we stop AI from arriving because it's already here, but rather how do we collaborate with it? How do we go beyond coexisting with it? But how do we collaborate with it in a way that might be useful to the people we serve? And I'm not going to promise an answer to that question in this episode, but what I can promise is some consideration of different variables. Why does this even matter now? I mean, it seems that despite more and more people going to graduate school to become therapists, and there being more options for that to happen, right? We're not just talking about at state universities or even private institutions. There are for-profit institutions that are training therapists. There are, PsyD programs training psychologists in large numbers, taking cohorts of, 60, 70, 80, even over 100 people. So it seems there are more therapists than ever, and yet people are still having trouble accessing mental health care. Now, some of that isn't just because there aren't enough therapists. Some places there aren't. Some of that has to do with third-party payment issues, right? It has to do with late capitalism. There's a lot of different reasons, but access issues are one reason why AI will find a niche and is continuing to find a niche in mental health care. Therapist burnout. Therapists are set up with these huge caseloads at a lot of places, especially therapists early on in their career, right? Impossible caseloads, dealing with so much. And when we think about these kinds of issues, just those two, let's just take access issues and therapist burnout. There are probably ways that AI can help us with those. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that AI will become the therapist. And I think that's often what people are worried about. Therapists are worried about is that we'll be replaced by AI. And I'm hoping for this conversation not to be one of doom and gloom, but more a curious conversation and one that is hopefully thoughtful and asks some questions rather than giving or making definitive proclamations. I want to start by sharing a story. I think this was last month that this happened for me. So I'm recording this in January of 2026. So I think this was in December of last year. And I had the privilege to be able to interact with a new technology. I'm not going to name the particulars of whose technology it is and all of that because, that's for another time and place. But what it was essentially a sim bot that simmed a client in psychotherapy. And I, played the role of therapist. So I spoke to this bot. And just to be really honest with you, I came into this interaction feeling pretty confident that I could trick this AI bot. I already do therapy in a bit of a weird way. I mean, those of you that know anything about my work in narrative therapy, it might be a little different in certain ways from traditional approaches to therapy. Now, there are some similarities too, but my point is I tend to ask some weird questions. So I was like, look, there's no way this AI bot's going to hang with that, right? Oh boy, did it hang. It really It really hung because about 10-ish minutes into the conversation, something really interesting happened for me. I had this felt sense this visceral feeling inside of me while I was talking to this bot that I recognize as the same sort of feeling I have when I'm talking to actual clients I'm working with. And I'm going to be honest with you, this messed me up. I stopped at that moment. I stopped engaging with the technology because it was like, look, I'm speaking to a bot here, and yet I'm having these uniquely human feelings. Now, listen, I play video games, I watch movies, I read books, and certainly in reaction to these things, I have feelings, right? But what made this strange is that it was a bot that was dynamically mimicking a therapy session in a way that felt real to me. It felt familiar to me, like the kinds of conversations I have with people in my office. And so this messed me up. It messed me up not just because of therapy. First of all, the technology is amazing. This is way better than role playing. So as a teacher, I'm like, this is great. This is going to be so much better than silly role plays or the stuff we used to do, like when I was in school or even in my earlier days of teaching. So, pedagogically, this is going to be amazing. But boy, for humanity, I went down a dark path for a week or so. I mean, I started thinking about like, look, people people are going to have these bots instead of actual relationships. And you could say that's already happened. I know. I'm behind on this, but yes, intellectually, I knew this sort of thing was already going on, but to actually experience it myself and have this sort of deeply human reaction that I've been having for 20 plus years in the work that I do as a therapist, wow. I just thought like this could go to a place where we're not actually talking to human beings anymore. We're talking to bots, and the bots play enough of a human role that it satisfies some of that need, or at least for a while it does. But then, for how long? I mean, over the long term, does that then is that actually poor for our mental health? And then I'm thinking about, especially with the video capabilities now, how long until we're on a Zoom call or something and we don't know if the person on the other end of that is a bot or a human being, right? I won't take you all the way down the dark portal that I went down, but I started thinking about all of these things and it really messed me up. And then I did the thing I think us humans often do, which is I went to this place of, gosh, I wish it was just the way it was when I grew up. I started reminiscing about growing up in the 80s and 90s and, how it was a much simpler time and all the things, which I think, I actually started finding these videos online. You can find these videos that show just random clips. This one was in the late 1990s at a Blockbuster video. For those of you who are a bit younger, you used to rent VHS tapes and then DVDs, right? And you couldn't just stream everything. My kids can't even believe that such a time existed. My daughter's like, that's so stupid. And I said, well, yeah, maybe it was, but it's what we had. And actually, is kind of amazing. That whole slow process of going to the video store and the anticipation. And then you walked in the video store and there was something actually tactile about picking up the boxes and reading the descriptions. And, this is just one example of my upbringing. And so, of course, when the present that's moving quickly into the future became too scary, what did I do? I reverted back to the past, what felt comfortable, right? But the reality is, as a therapist, what I experience interacting with that bot for 10 minutes, this is where things are moving, whether I like it or not, right? And so I think it deserves some conversation. So, what are we talking about when we say AI in therapy? I think the first place many therapists have gone is AI as the actual therapist, right? Direct conversational support. In the example I gave, I was still the therapist. The AI was the client, right? It was a client bot that gave, a therapist a chance to practice their skills. But I think what therapists are worried about is the bots that are the therapists. They provide, direct conversational support. And even if they're not therapy bots, I mean, what if they're coaching bots? I think there's long been friction between the worlds of therapists and coaches, right? They just call them coaching bots. I mean, maybe they become essentially like manualized CBT bots. So one worry when we talk about AI in therapy that therapists have had is that the AI itself becomes the therapist. Now, that's a worry from our side. It may not be such a worry for the people that seek our services. It may be for some, but for others, it might seem much more accessible. Now, of course, the question is how efficacious is it? Which, we don't really have answers to that quite yet. We have a lot of theories, we have a lot of opinions, but we don't have so much research on it quite yet. How about AI as like therapy adjacent? I actually think there's a lot of interesting potential here that I'll talk about later, but how about AI writing your notes, doing your treatment planning, summarizing research for you, doing your scheduling and screening, intakes, triage, etc. Right? I'm sure there's more that I left off. That's just off the top of my head that there's a number of things that AI can be really useful for as sort of a therapy adjacent tool. I don't know how each of you are using AI. It's probably a little bit different. But for me, I've found AI to be useful as kind of a creative collaborator. So when I'm writing, for example, I can get it to critique my writing. And I can have it critique my writing in particular ways as if it were particular people, or I can have it be scrutinized for certain audiences, right? I found all that to be really useful. So that can be true with therapy as well, right? I mean, it can help us and it can help the clients that we're serving perhaps with reflective type journaling. It can expand and build metaphors. And I think, of course, I go to stories and metaphors because that's often in how I work. I mean, maybe for other ways of working, it would be like a psychoeducational companion, right? That the bot is doing the psychoeducation rather than the therapist, or at least is doing part of it or reinforcing it along the way. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential there too, where the AI is a companion because when you think about it, I mean, at most, there are some circumstances that are different, of course, with people in crisis or certain types of therapy or whatever. But in general, most people aren't going to therapy more than once a week, right? For an hour. That's the vast, vast minority of their existence. So AI is a creative collaborator that sort of helps along what you're having conversations about in the room. Gosh, I think there's a lot of potential there. Now, again, often we go back to that same fear of like, well, but then what if it just becomes the therapist? And I'll share a client story in a little bit around that very point. I do think as we're talking about these things, though, like part of what I'm talking about is direct clinical work and then ancillary or adjacent or support work. And there's a huge ethical difference between a bot doing direct clinical work versus a bot doing support work. And I think these are the sorts of things we're going to have to sift out. And of course, our ethical codes don't have any way of accounting for this yet. I mean, we still call therapy on Zoom like platforms telehealth. What the hell? Telehealth? Sounds like it's from 1983, right? I mean, our ethical codes and the way we've operated are really far behind in a lot of ways. And, some of that is of our own doing and we're responsible for. And some of that right now is just that AI is moving so quickly. that how can any sort of governing body account for everything that it's capable of? I mean, this is happening for me as a professor in higher education, right? I mean, I'm considering, is it even worth having students write papers anymore? I'm leaning towards the answer is no. Like, what are we doing with that? So the students are going to have AI write the paper. I'm going to have AI grade the paper. Yes, professors do that too. And then, so what are we even doing? So AI is doing everything then. So I'm trying to find ways in the classroom, for example, to harness AI, um, to use it in a way that might help with what we're actually trying to do, which is learn. I think that's what we're trying to do, right? Or ask good questions, right? I mean, learning is a complicated process. It's not always like learning a skill, right? It's questioning, it's thinking, it's looking at things through multiple lenses. I mean, AI could be helpful. And I still think, one thing I've noticed about AI is in order for AI to be effective, let me put it this way: AI is only as effective as the questions you ask it, right? And so, in some ways, AI is inviting us to be better question askers, which, I I think we could use some of that in the world. Okay, so what might be some of the potential benefits and possibilities that exist with AI? We've started alluding to some of them, but one is increased access, right? People who live in rural communities, therapy tends to be expensive and cost prohibitive. So, for people who live in areas where without access to a lot of therapists or who don't have the means, AI could be useful. Of course, I would imagine in a neoliberal late capitalist society that right now, of course, people are using Chat GPT for relatively low cost or for free. You can only do some stuff for free. And I'm just talking about Chat GPT. There's all these other AI platforms, and they seem to only keep expanding, right? Right now, it's great for people who may not have a lot of money. I would assume this is all going to get really monetized in a late capitalist society. And so I would imagine that that advantage may not be there forever. People are going to find ways to monetize it. But for right now, certainly increased access and maybe, decreased cost. AI is available 24/7. That's interesting because, on one hand, that can be great. When someone's having a crisis at 3 in the morning, right? Therapists don't tend to be up then. I mean, sometimes there are really, like suicidal crises that happen. The therapists tend to at odd hours, of course, right? But generally speaking, therapists aren't awake in the middle of the night. And these bots can be available. The question, though, becomes that's a potential benefit, right? 24/7 availability. But the flip side of that coin is, if people are lonely and they start interacting with these bots and that becomes their way of seeking support and interacting with the world, what are the consequences of that? I don't know that we can say that in a generalized way. I mean, I think, that might be really useful for some people and really detrimental for others, and, you know, everywhere in between for other people. But the potential exists there for there to be 24/7 availability, which really doesn't exist with therapy as we know it now. Another potential benefit, perhaps there's like a reduced stigma barrier. And that's to say, some clients may share more openly with, how to say it, maybe a non-human presence, a human seeming but non-human presence. Although, again, the flip side of that coin is that, but that maybe that's part of the work, right? Is that people are learning how to share, even despite the difficulty and the vulnerability with other human beings while looking them in the eye, right? And having those depth, those sort of deep conversations. So there always seems to be a flip side. When I think of the potential benefit, immediately I can think of the risk. But for people, at least as a starting point, who wouldn't want to interact with a therapist, a human therapist, perhaps they'd interact with a bot, and that reduces that stigma barrier. There's certainly with AI's consistency and memory. I mean, AI really doesn't forget context unless you tell it to. AI does a remarkable job, especially at the level it's at now, in remembering things. And so that consistency and that memory could certainly be a potential benefit. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but let's call it therapist relief. So all of those sort of admin things that we'd really prefer not to be doing. Um, can we? I mean, of course we can, it's already happening, but how much of this can we outsource to AI? And then hopefully what that's giving is more emotional bandwidth for actual human connection. Because I think, you know, for a lot of us, myself included, what takes up most of the bandwidth is the actual attunement and connection I have with the people I'm in conversation with. And by the way, that's where I want that bandwidth to go. But that's what makes me feel exhausted at the end of a day of seeing clients. It's also what makes it feel so rewarding, by the way. So when I say it uses a lot of emotional bandwidth, it's not like this horrible thing. Most of the time, it's not. It's beautiful. And boy, it takes a lot of energy. And then all this admin stuff on top of it. I mean, how much of that can AI take care of for us? I mentioned psychoeducation earlier. Psychoeducation, other sorts of tools. I mean, a lot of therapists prescribe certain interventions. So, breathing, certain prompts, reframes, exercise, homework. I mean, all those sorts of things that are a part of some types of therapy. Presumably, AI could be really helpful with those kinds of things. And this last, of course, there are more benefits. I'm just spitballing some benefits, but this last one that's coming to mind for me before I'll move on to some of the risks, harms, concerns, etc. But this is one I've actually seen in the work that I'm doing. AI can really serve as a mirror that helps people witness themselves. And at least for me in my work, that's a big part of what I've been trying to do with people is create a set of circumstances where people can witness themselves. And AI can do that. It can help people witness themselves in their own words in a way that sometimes it's almost like they're reading about themselves as the protagonist in a story. Although maybe we're not always the protagonists of the stories, right? But whatever the case, it allows us to witness ourselves. All right, what are some of the risks, harms, concerns that have been on my mind? Of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the ones that come to mind. What about misdiagnosis or otherwise harmful guidance? I mean, if we're being honest, the DSM doesn't have great inter-rater reliability to begin with, right? Um, Therapists don't always agree on the diagnostics, which actually I don't think is often an issue with the therapist themselves and their training. Of course, sometimes it is, but I think it might be more of an issue of the diagnostic system itself, but that's for another podcast. But misdiagnosis or otherwise harmful guidance could be a risk of AI. And in some ways, that sort of thing has already been happening even before AI, right? WebMD, that sort of phenomenon where people are looking up their diagnoses and they're coming in with what my friends Tom Carlson and Sunny Payaka call unstories, right? They're coming in with just a label, and AI could take this even further, right? Where people have diagnosed themselves based on AI or otherwise gotten harmful guidance. Another potential risk of AI, the lack of embodied presence. Although it is interesting, in the example I shared at the start of the show today, I mean,
like I felt something in connection to this bot that felt just like what I feel in therapy, but there wasn't an actual embodied presence yet. I mean, shoot, I don't know. Maybe we're going to have holograms or something that sit across from I don't know where all this is going to go. So this is just with what I see now. There isn't the same embodied presence. Of course, many of us are doing therapy on Zoom these days, or at least part of our therapy on Zoom. I mean, maybe there isn't the same embodied presence there either because we're looking at pixels. We're not actually looking at a person across from us. We're looking at them in pixelated form. But presumably, that lack of embodied presence matters at some level. There may not be the same nervous system attunement, that same kind of, what do my psychodynamic friends call this? The relational field, the co-regulation, these things that happen. Um, Presumably, they aren't happening in the same way without embodied presence. There are certainly ethical and privacy risks. What about data collection? What about surveillance capitalism? What about corporate control of mental health resources? I mean, do I need to go on? I mean, those are just a few of them, but there are certainly ethical and privacy risks. And I think those risks are some of the easiest to identify and have worried therapists from the jump, most therapists from the jump when talking about AI. What to call this? Maybe like over-reliance. So what happens when clients substitute human connection almost completely with machines or AI? I mean, I alluded to my worry about that earlier. I mean, what are the consequences of that? To be honest, we don't know for sure. But already, even before all of this AI at this level, because AI has been around a long time, but these LLMs haven't been, right? But, like people are more connected in one sense right now than they ever have been. And that's even before these LLMs, because you on Facebook, you have 20 friends, or you have 200 friends, or you have 2,000 friends, or whatever it is on Instagram and Facebook and all the things. And so, on one hand, it looks like human beings are more connected than ever. But what is the quality of that connection? Right? Certainly, a connection that is almost all digital isn't the same kind of connection as an embodied connection. And so if humans start substituting that real embodied human connection almost exclusively they trade that out almost exclusively for relationships with machines, it seems like there could be some rather severe consequences from that. Dehumanization of care, right? So as healthcare systems start using these AI tools even more to cut costs, what could be the consequences of that? I mean, on one hand, it may be cheaper, it may actually be more efficient, but do you lose a human touch that's important? Again, this might be showing my age, but sometimes when I've got like a technological issue or I need to make a return or just something in the world and I want to call someone and actually talk to someone, it feels impossible, you know? And then you're going through the phone and they're hit one for this, hit two for this, and you can't talk to an actual person, right? And that can be maddening. Now, if you have a simple operation you're trying to perform, often those automated phone services are great, right? Because you just hit a few buttons and you're done. But the problem happens when you have an issue that, is an odd issue. It's one that isn't encountered very often. Then what happens? Well, the automated service can't solve it. And you can't talk to a person. And then you start to become most of us anyway, become really, really frustrated, right? And then maybe we have to email support or something. And then 2 days later, someone calls us or whatever it is. So it's very efficient until there's something that is weird, odd, variable, off the beaten path a little bit. And hey, when it involves some sort of purchase you made, yeah, that's frustrating, but the stakes are low. But when that sort of thing is happening with our own healthcare, physical healthcare, mental healthcare, et cetera, oh boy, I mean, the consequences feel a bit more complicated then. You know, another risk is issues of equity, because again, AI, as much as it seems human, is not. So whose values are being programmed into the model? Whose psychology or theory becomes the standard? And it's very subtle. Yes, sometimes it's not very subtle and it's very obvious, but it's often very subtle. The way that dominant values get programmed into these things. I mean, they get programmed into our lives, right? Just through learning. But now with I think we have to think about equity issues because we don't know whose values are being programmed into the model, whose ideas become the standard and what other ideas are being disregarded. And that, again, that's a human issue when we consider knowledge and power. But it's, AI is so convincing. You know what I mean? It's so convincing with the responses it gives. I noticed on ChatGPT recently they have a thing that said, AI can be wrong, so make sure you check to make sure, check to make sure it's accurate. Yeah, but it's not very tentative. AI doesn't go, well, maybe it's this or maybe it's dude. It spits something out that is confident, and you read that shit and you're like, yeah, that looks good. It knows what it's talking about just because it presents it with such confidence. Of course, it's not always accurate. And so when we're talking about things like equity issues, the way those things can be programmed in there are so subtle. And AI presents so confidently that I think we really have to be on guard there. What about liability and regulation? I mean, this is a huge risk. Like, who's responsible when AI harms someone? Who's responsible? Is it OpenAI? Is it the therapist? Is it I don't know, right? And in a highly litigious society, this is something that we're going to have to deal with because AI has already and will continue to harm people. And then in a litigious society, who's responsible? Who's legally responsible? But then there's this other layer, which is like, who's morally responsible for these things? I mean, we're really going to have to grapple with that. And then the last one that I'll say is, let's call it like subtle relational harm. Generally speaking, AI is agreeable. AI thinks you're great. I mean, I could ask AI what the weather is going to be like today in San Diego, and it's going to be like, Dr. Travis Heath, that is a magnificent question. Like, really? Okay. They're just trying to figure out if it's going to be sunny or not. In San Diego, it probably is, but you know what I mean? It's so agreeable. And of course, when you say that, people are quick to be like, yeah, but you can program it not to. Okay, but how many people are doing that? Yes, I'm around a lot of deep thinkers and a lot of people who've been spending a lot of time thinking about AI, among other things. And so, sure, they might do that with AI, but is the average person going to tinker that much with AI, or are they just going to ask it questions? And by the way, it tells you you're great. Who doesn't want to be told we're great? That's a fantastic question, you know? And so there's a huge risk in that, I think. Because, by the way, I'm not always great. None of us are. We make mistakes, we have oversights. Sometimes we ask questions that aren't very thought out, we forget things. I mean, all those things are what make us human. Also, AI, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have the ability for rupture and repair. They miss those kind of relational growth experiences that can happen in a therapeutic relationship. It doesn't just have to happen in a therapeutic relationship, but often these things can happen in a therapeutic relationship. So there can be what I might call these subtle relational harms that could happen. So some potential benefits, some risks, harms, and concerns. why are we so scared of AI? What's the deal there? I'll tell you what I make of that. I mean, I think it's a threat to our professional identity and our expertise. Basically, what I'm saying is like, if a machine can do this, what's my value? That's essentially the question we're asking ourselves. If a machine can do this, why do I matter? And that's connected to a fear of being replaced. And that's a deep existential fear, right? Because it's like, well, then we're going to have to find a new line of work. And then then I'm not going to have money. And then what's going to happen to my family? And what's going to, right? So yes, it's a threat to our professional identity and expertise, but it's also a deep existential threat that will be replaced. That's the fear. I'm not saying that will be the reality, but that's the fear. I think we tend to have a mistrust of the tech industry and maybe its motives, which are often aligned with making a lot of money. And, as therapists, we're often trained in human connection. And in that way, I think AI can almost feel existentially offensive, right? Because it's like, no, this is deep human work. And then AI is just spitting out this answer that might be better than what we can do. Probably oftentimes is. Now, of course, what it might be missing is that, deeper attunement between two human beings, et cetera, all the human stuff that we talked about. But that can feel really existentially offensive, if I can make up a phrase. I think there's anxiety that we therapists have about commodification of care. I think that's happening anyway outside of AI, but I think AI brings that even more to the forefront. And then, I look, people in the field that have been doing this a long time, and also people just have studied history, the history of the field, and it doesn't just have to be in psychotherapy. There's a historical memory. Every quote unquote innovation in mental health has been framed initially as more efficient care. And what did it end up often being? Cost cutting. Right? So it's existing in this larger capitalist framework that's actually about cutting costs and making things less expensive for someone at the top. But they frame it as more efficient care. And who doesn't want more efficient care? Who among us does not want more efficient care? Everybody wants more efficient care, right? But often what it's been a bit of a bait and switch where it's actually been about cost cutting. I don't know, bait and switch, just semantics and how it's being explained, because it might be more efficient in some ways, but what are we losing in the process? And so I think we as a bunch are skeptical of innovation. Not skeptical of innovation, but quote unquote innovation. That's actually more about cost cutting. So I'll share a quick story. A client of mine who uses AI, and he uses it in a really cool way where he journals and he inputs, themes of our sessions, etc., into an LLM. And so he's using this to good effect. It's a really cool process. This would be another episode sometime, but he actually produces documents before each session that AI sort of summarizes what's come out of our last conversation, and then, where his life is at, and some of where he's hoping to go. And we see each other every 2 weeks. Okay. So he's really using AI. And just to give my own bias, I have been skeptical of AI from the jump. I'm less skeptical of it, but just as worried, if not more, about what it might do. But I'm certainly using it more than I used to. But I am nowhere near as savvy with it as this particular client is. So he's using this in our work in really particular ways. And I asked him at one point, I said, if you have AI and it's doing all this work, why the hell do you need me? Like, why keep me? And he said something like, oh, I have a lot to say about that. And the part that's most memorable to me is he goes, look, AI will never replace this kind of human connection that we have. And AI will never replace great therapists, only bad ones, which I sort of laughed at. Now, of course, that's subjective, right? What makes a great therapist? What makes a bad therapist? I mean, you should listen to my earlier episode with Dr. Daryl Chow, where he talks some about what makes therapists good. It's really interesting stuff a couple episodes back. But, I think the point he's making, we can argue about what makes a good therapist or a bad therapist, but part of what he said too is therapists that aren't just collecting a paycheck. They're really there and you can tell they care and they're involved, right? They're engaged and it isn't just about collecting a paycheck, you know? That those sorts of therapists won't be replaced. It's an interesting perspective. And maybe we will be, but that story made me think, you know? So AI, will it replace human care entirely? Probably not. Can it replace therapists who mostly rely on worksheets, scripts, and like surface level empathy and reflection? Probably. It probably can replace those therapists. So when we say we're worried about being replaced as therapists, I think maybe what AI is actually doing is it's mirroring and exposing where our profession may be going flat.
It's challenging manualized protocols that have become too mechanical. It's challenging therapy that's become disembodied, impersonal, rote, based on checklists. It's challenging all of that. And so, in that way, we can look at AI as a helpful friend, one of the best friends you can have that's pushing you to be better. Maybe what AI is doing is it's forcing us therapists back towards more relational depth, towards creativity, towards humanity, because look, AI will do the protocol for you. It'll do the worksheet, the script. It can provide the surface level empathy. It can provide all of that stuff. So maybe we look at this as an invitation to reinvigorate our practices. That's all I have for you this time. It's always so much fun being in conversation with all of you. I appreciate like the emails that I get and so forth. The fact you're taking the time to listen means a lot. As always, if you're up for it, give us a review and leave the 5 stars. Well, if you think it's 5 stars, I won't tell you what to put, but if you enjoy it and you think it's 5 stars, give us 5 stars. More people will find us that way. If you enjoy this episode or particular episode, send it to a friend or a colleague so that we can add more people to our Therapist Confidential community here. All right, everybody. Great talking with you. Till next time.